Starting my project. I started with an article that was a historical piece about the decade of quality of research in art education. This was a really great foundation for me as it showed me methodological and pedagogical questions, such as what forms of content and differentiating instruction are dominant and what context they come in. It also showed me what have we learned by studying outstanding teachers. It also showed things like what can descriptions of on-site curriculum and specific programs discover? What is the meaning of art experience, and how do students regard art? These were a few questions that I thought really stood out from that article. This kind of led me on a pathway, and that's how I went further into my research for this project. The second article was an action-based piece, a process over product, and it really focused on inquiry-based teaching. Key terms that she brought up were things like children need to have discovery, and that a good lesson should have cross-curricular with math and science and ELA. The idea of collaboration or working as a group, providing opportunities for your students to explore, and making content for them to be able to be engaged. Furthermore, having the ability to let your students communicate, and how art classrooms have the ability for problem solving and fostering community. The next article I found was a case study. A really good teacher would be like you, Mrs. C. Key words that she brought up were things were like structure and the idea of leadership in the classroom, and how there are two worlds, the student world and the art world, and how we can make them meet in the middle. Her curriculum, similar to a DBAE, had an image flood. She gave student images, a reflection, which was done midway through and at the end of the project, artwork, which was them making and her demonstrating, a critique, which was done midway through and at the end, and then an exhibition, which was worked on as a group. The fourth article was philosophical, about why study classroom talk. Kartner also follows similar to DBAE with the idea of studio practice, aesthetics within the classroom, the idea of having an art criticism, and also the idea of having an art history component. Kartner argues that all of this builds things like scope, art discourse, explores meaning, and shows child-centered talk. His key terms furthered on this by things like student art vernacular, connecting back child-centered versus teacher-centered discourse, the idea of social goals, wanting that A, and the scope of how all of these play together. This brought me to my final article, which was more like my theoretical framework with Maxine Green's aesthetic literacy. She talked about things like symbol systems, the idea of perception and how no one has an innocent eye. She also talked about the idea of an imagination and how we can foster or dampen those, and created structures, how we can break them or encourage them. And all of this happens within aesthetic education, and if done correctly, it can lead to self-taught discovery. She goes further on to mention about how good teachers offer student opportunities, which allow them to make their own mental sets, and eventually in her goal of creating a heightened sense of awareness. She says that this happens in an aesthetic space, which can happen within the classroom. My next part of this was that I made pathways of how these articles I thought really connected back to my main questions from the first historical piece.